Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with the simple truth. You don't rise by dragging others down. You rise by standing firm in your values, especially when it's hardest to do so. Winners, real winners, don't win by being louder, meaner, or more manipulative. They win by choosing who they give their energy to, and more importantly, who they don't. You see, toxic people don't show up with warning labels. They show up as coworkers, friends, even family. They don't always scream chaos. Sometimes they whisper it. They feed off reaction, off drama, off attention. And the mistake most people make? They try to fix them. They try to prove themselves. They try to argue their worth. But here's the hard truth. You can't win a game that was rigged against you from the start. So how do winners handle toxic people? They don't play the game. They choose clarity over conflict. They speak the truth kindly but firmly. They walk away not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to protect their peace. See, a winner understands something critical. You don't let someone else's chaos become your compass. If they lie, you still tell the truth. If they gossip, you stay silent. If they belittle, you build. Winners don't retaliate. They respond. And sometimes that response is distance. Because one of the highest forms of self-respect is setting a boundary that doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be lived. Winners understand that not every battle is worth fighting. When they encounter toxic people, those who manipulate, drain, or disrupt, they don't jump into confrontation. They don't engage in emotional tug-of-war or spend hours trying to prove their worth. They know these kinds of interactions are traps. Toxic people thrive on chaos. They bait others into arguments, distort facts, and feed off attention. The moment you start trying to outmatch them in their own game, you've already lost something important. Your focus, your calm, your clarity. Instead of getting pulled into the negativity, winners make a conscious choice to step away. It's not about being passive, it's about being smart. They see the signs early, the patterns of manipulation, the subtle digs, the drama that follows like a shadow. And instead of staying in that space trying to change someone who doesn't want to grow, they redirect their energy toward things that truly matter. This doesn't mean winners lack empathy. In fact, it's the opposite. They care deeply about people. But they also understand that they are not responsible for fixing those who refuse to take responsibility for themselves. They draw a line between compassion and self-sacrifice. They choose to lead with strength, not reaction. Winners operate with a mindset that protects their mission. They recognize that every moment spent dealing with unnecessary conflict is a moment stolen from their purpose. So rather than trying to control or win over toxic individuals, they invest in environments that support growth, authenticity, and mutual respect. There's a quiet power in refusing to engage. It's not loud or showy, but it's effective. Walking away without a word, choosing silence over shouting, choosing progress over proving a point. These are the moves of someone who knows their worth. Winners don't need to win arguments. They win by choosing where their energy goes. They understand that attention is power, and not everyone deserves it. That's the real difference. While others get distracted trying to fight toxic battles, winners stay in their lane. They rise not because they crush others, but because they refuse to be pulled down. In the face of toxicity, their strength is in their stillness. And that's what sets them apart. When winners deal with toxic people, they don't fall into the trap of reacting emotionally. They've trained themselves to respond, not retaliate. This distinction is powerful. Reaction is often immediate, impulsive, and emotionally charged. It gives the other person control over your state. Retaliation, especially when dealing with someone toxic, usually escalates the situation, creating more damage than resolution. but response is intentional, it's thoughtful, it comes from a place of clarity rather than chaos. Winners understand that staying calm in a storm is a form of strength. They don't allow someone else's poor behavior to dictate their own. When someone lies, they don't counter with anger, they stand by the truth. When someone gossips or undermines, they don't join in or fight back with the same weapons. They choose silence, grace, or direct communication. They don't seek to humiliate or shame. Instead, they draw the line clearly and walk away with their dignity intact. This kind of restraint isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It means you are emotionally intelligent enough to manage your own reactions. Toxic people often crave drama and attention, and they'll do whatever they can to provoke. Winners don't give them that satisfaction. They see it for what it is, a distraction, and instead of being baited, they keep their focus, they know their values, and they lead with those values, no matter who they're dealing with. And they know to what degree they could lead with those values says it all. This approach also preserves energy. Engaging in constant emotional conflict is exhausting. Winners conserve their energy for what truly matters: their work, their mission, their loved ones, their peace. They've learned that sometimes the best way to deal with toxicity is not to win an argument, but to maintain their center. That inner stillness becomes their greatest weapon. Winners respond with boundaries, with clarity, with calm confidence. They're not trying to prove anything, they're just living in alignment. And in doing so, they send a clear message. I'm not available for this. Not every insult gets a reply. Not every drama deserves a reaction. When you can stay centered while others are spinning out, you've already won. In the end, winners don't get pulled down to toxic levels. They lift the conversation or they end it. Either way, they lead, not just with words, but with example. Winners understand that boundaries aren't barriers to keep others out. They're bridges to self-respect. When they encounter toxic behavior, they don't retaliate, absorb it, or tolerate it indefinitely. Instead, they create space, not with aggression, but with intention. They recognize that maintaining their mental, emotional, and even spiritual well-being means knowing when to say enough. And that enough doesn't always need to be said out loud. It's often spoken through consistent action. A winner's boundary is not always a dramatic exit. It can be subtle. A step back from a draining conversation, a reduced response time to negativity, a quiet choice to not engage. These decisions aren't made in bitterness, but in clarity. It's the understanding that you don't have to stay where you're not respected, heard, or valued. Winners don't wait for others to change. They change their own standards, their own proximity to toxic energy, and in doing so, reclaim their power. What makes this approach so effective is that it's not reactive, it's intentional. Winners don't set boundaries out of spite. They do it out of self-awareness. They've done the inner work to know what aligns with their values and what doesn't. And when someone consistently crosses the line, disrespects them, or creates emotional chaos, they don't argue or plead. They adjust access, not to punish, but to protect. And here's what's remarkable. These boundaries teach others how to treat them, not through confrontation, but through consistency. Winners send a powerful message not by shouting, "I deserve better," but by silently living like they do. They walk away from environments that make them small. They distance themselves from conversations that drain their spirit. And in doing so, they preserve the space needed to thrive. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It's an act of self-respect. And for winners, self-respect is non-negotiable. They know that if they constantly allow toxic behavior in, they're not being strong. They're being silently eroded. So instead, they choose to protect their energy, to say yes only to what builds them and no to what breaks them. In the end, it's not about shutting people out. It's about choosing peace over chaos. Winners don't create walls. They create wisdom. And in that wisdom, they find the freedom to grow, succeed, and stay true to who they are. Winners don't chase approval, they pursue purpose. They understand that trying to be liked by everyone is not only impossible, it's distracting. Toxic people often rely on this very need for acceptance to manipulate others, to guilt them into staying in unhealthy dynamics, or to gain control through fear of disapproval. But winners break free from that trap. They know their worth isn't determined by external applause. It's grounded in internal alignment with their values, their goals, and their mission. This mindset allows winners to make decisions that may not always be popular, but are necessary. They can walk away from relationships that no longer serve them. They can step back from environments that dim their light. And they can do it without resentment because their motivation isn't revenge or validation. It's clarity. They know where they're going, and they're not going to sacrifice their direction to please people who don't share their vision or values. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you start becoming something real to the right people. That's how winners operate. They surround themselves with individuals who bring peace, not pressure, who support growth, not gossip. This selectiveness isn't arrogance, it's intention. Just as a gardener removes weeds to let flowers thrive, winners remove toxic influences to protect what they're building. Focusing on purpose also gives winners resilience. They're less likely to be shaken by criticism or backhanded comments because they're grounded in something bigger than ego. Their mission becomes a compass, and every time they choose it over conflict, they grow stronger, more focused, and more free. They realize that not everyone will understand their path, and that's okay. Understanding is not a requirement for respect. Winners don't need to explain their boundaries, justify their silence, or defend their decisions to people committed to misunderstanding them. They lead by example, and eventually, their consistency speaks louder than any explanation ever could. They live in alignment, and that integrity becomes magnetic. The right people are drawn in, the wrong people drift away. That's the real power, when you stop living to impress others and start living to express your highest self. Winners protect their energy, honor their vision, and let their success be the loudest voice in the room. That's how they rise, not by being liked by everyone, but by being loyal to their purpose,